She said yes to forever, then the Jaeyoung network sent their answer. The ring box sat in his jacket pocket for 6 days before he found the nerve to open it in front of her. Nadine Z had survived an 8-month visa process, a city that never paused for grief, and one terrifying night with a vase in her hands and a secret behind a study door. She thought the hardest part was over. She thought the storm had already passed through the Kang estate and left for good. She was wrong. On the morning everything changed again, she was teaching the twins how to fold dumplings, her hands dusted in flour, Minji's nose smudged white from a bad sneeze, Minjun narrating the process out loud like a tiny news anchor. The kitchen smelled like ginger and home. And then a black sedan she didn't recognize rolled slowly past the estate's outer wall, twice, before it disappeared. She didn't mention it to anyone. Not yet. She had learned, in this house, that some silences were for protecting people and some silences were for protecting yourself. She wasn't sure yet which one this was. If you watched part 1, you already know what kind of woman Nadine Z is, the kind who doesn't flinch when 3 black cars pull up outside a noodle diner, the kind who walks into a crime boss's study and sets a wooden spoon down like a verdict. You know Kang Tae-hyun too. A man who learned that love was a liability and built an empire on top of that lesson until 2 small boys and 1 fearless cook from Douala taught him otherwise. Part 1 ended with peace. A real smile. A cup of tea by the river. Peace, in this world, is never permanent. It's borrowed. Stay with us. This is where the real cost comes due. If you're new here, welcome to Afro-Korean Cartel Stories. Hit that subscribe button before you keep watching. Now, let's continue. 3 weeks of quiet had passed since Mr. Shin disappeared from the estate, and the quiet had started to feel like something Nadine could actually trust, the way a kettle on low heat eventually stops being something you watch and becomes something you simply live around. The twins had grown an inch each, or so it seemed, though she suspected it was just the way confidence made children stand taller without anyone noticing the difference. Minjun had started correcting Taehyun's grammar at the dinner table, delivering each correction with the gravity of a courtroom ruling. Minjae had taken to humming constantly, in elevators, in hallways, in his sleep, the sound drifting under doors at odd hours like a small, contented ghost. Then, on a Tuesday morning that began like every other, Taehyun did not come down for breakfast. Nadine found him in the study, standing at the window with his back to the door, a tablet glowing in his hand, his shoulders set in a way she had only seen once before, the night the vase nearly shattered in her hands. She didn't need to ask what was wrong. The line of his spine told her everything before he turned around to face her. Seon's accident, he said without preamble, was the opening move. Not the only one. He turned the tablet toward her. A grainy security still filled the screen, a man she didn't recognize, photographed outside the estate's east gate on 3 separate days, in 3 separate disguises, patient in a way that chilled her more than any single threat could have. Jae-sung, she said, the name landing heavier now than it had the first time she'd heard it. They're not finished, Taehyun said, setting the tablet face down on the desk, as though he could not stand to look at it any longer. I thought removing Shin would close the door. It opened a new one. Nadine set down the coffee she'd brought him, untouched now, growing cold between them on the polished wood. What do they want? He was quiet long enough that she understood the answer before he said it aloud, the silence itself a kind of confession. 18 months ago, they wanted to break me by taking my wife. His voice didn't shake, but something underneath it did, something old and carefully buried. I think now they've realized that grief didn't break me the way they hoped it would. So they're looking for something that will. He looked at her, and the look lasted a fraction too long to be about strategy alone, lasted long enough that the room itself seemed to notice. Don't, she said quietly, before he could finish the thought. I haven't said anything. You didn't have to. I could read it on your face the way Minjun reads a room before he decides whether to enter it. Security at the estate tripled overnight, transforming the quiet, graceful property into something closer to a fortress that had simply forgotten to look like one. Cars Nadine didn't recognize idled at the gates in rotating shifts, headlights cutting through early morning fog. Mrs. Yoon moved through the halls with a clipboard and a face like carved stone, checking window latches twice, sometimes 3 times, muttering numbers under her breath like a woman counting something far more important than locks. The twins noticed, the way children always notice the things adults try hardest to hide, absorbing tension through walls and closed doors, and the careful new silence at the dinner table. At breakfast, Minjun set down his spoon and asked, with the directness only a 7-year-old can manage without cruelty, "Is someone going to hurt us again?" The table went silent. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Taehyun's jaw tightened, his hand stilling around his cup. Nadine reached over and put her hand flat on the table between the two boys, not touching either of them, just present, just steady, the way she had learned to be in moments that asked for more calm than she actually felt. "Your father is making sure that doesn't happen," she said. "That's his whole job right now, every single hour of it. Mine is making sure you both still get dessert no matter what else is happening in this house." Min-jae considered this with great seriousness, his small face scrunched in the particular concentration he usually reserved for difficult drawings. "Even if it's scary?" "Especially if it's scary," Nadine said. "Scary doesn't get to take dessert too. That's a rule now." It wasn't a real answer. It wasn't supposed to be. But Minjun's shoulders loosened a degree, and Min-jae went back to his rice with the easy trust of a child who had decided, for now, to believe her completely. Across the table, Taehyun watched her diffuse a fear he hadn't known how to touch, the same way she had on that first hallway night months ago, and something in his chest ached with gratitude he didn't yet have words for. Later, alone in the kitchen, he found her chopping vegetables with more force than the vegetables required, the knife coming down hard and fast against the board. "You're angry," he said from the doorway. "I'm scared," she corrected, not looking up. "I just cook through it instead of standing very still and looking dangerous, like some people I know." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "That's a skill too, apparently. It's a knife skill, Taehyun. Yours is a different kind of sharp." He leaned against the counter, watching her hands work with a focus that had nothing to do with the vegetables. "I should send you somewhere safer. Until this is resolved." The knife stopped mid-motion. She looked up at him, and there was no fear in her face now, only something harder and far more certain. "If you try to send me away from those boys while they're frightened, I will make this kitchen very unpleasant for you for a very long time. Try me." He didn't try her. The threat arrived on a Thursday, folded inside a delivery of fresh produce that Nadine herself had ordered 3 days before, the kind of ordinary errand that made the violation feel even colder when she found it. She found it while unpacking, tucked between 2 heads of Napa cabbage like something that had been waiting patiently for her hands and no one else's. A photograph. Herself, walking the twins to the garden gate 2 days earlier, taken from somewhere beyond the estate wall, somewhere that should not have had a clear line of sight, somewhere a guard should have noticed and hadn't. On the back, in neat, unhurried handwriting that looked almost gentle, almost polite, "We see what he loves now too." Her hands went cold before her mind even caught up to why, the chill spreading from her fingertips toward her chest in a slow, creeping wave. She didn't scream. She didn't drop it. She walked, very steadily, down the hall to the study, knocked once, and placed it on his desk exactly the way she had placed the spoon weeks earlier, quietly, deliberately, a thing that demanded attention without demanding noise. Taehyun looked at the photograph for a long moment, his expression unreadable at first, and then cracking open in a way Nadine had never witnessed before. Something moved behind his eyes that was not the cold calculation she'd watched him wear like armor in every prior crisis, not even the raw grief she'd glimpsed once by the river. This was rawer than either. This was a man watching the one soft place he'd allowed himself, the one exception to a lifetime of careful walls, get circled in red ink by people who had clearly been counting on exactly that. "Get the boys," he said, voice low and absolutely flat, each word landing like a stone dropped into still water. "Taehyun, please." The word cracked slightly on its way out, the first time she had ever heard him say it like that, stripped entirely of the authority that usually shaped his sentences. "Get my sons." She got the boys, moving fast through the hallway, her own heart hammering against her ribs, gathering Minjun and Min-jae from the library where they were quietly arguing over a puzzle, neither of them yet aware that the quiet, ordinary afternoon had already ended somewhere they couldn't see. The estate went into a kind of lockdown Nadine hadn't known existed outside of films, guards moving with a speed and silence that made the whole house feel like a held breath. Posts she'd never seen occupied took shape at every window within the hour. The twins were moved to an interior room with no exterior wall, the heavy curtains drawn though it was barely noon, and Mrs. Yun sat with them, reading aloud in a voice pitched carefully calm despite the tightness around her eyes, while Nadine paced the hallway outside, unable to make herself sit still even for a moment. Taehyun found her there an hour later, his collar open, his composure visibly costing him more than usual to hold together, like a man bracing a door against a storm with nothing but his own weight. "I have a location on the man in the photograph," he said, "and on who hired him. My people have confirmed it twice." "Then go," she said. "Handle it. Whatever that means, do it. I don't want to leave you. Not after this. You have to." She said it simply, the way she said most true things, without flourish, without softening it more than necessary. "They're trying to make you choose between protecting your empire and protecting this house. Don't let them win that choice before you've even made it. Go end it and come back to us." He looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something, and she watched him decide something in that silence. Not about the threat outside, not about strategy or logistics, but about her. About the shape of what she'd become in this house, without either of them naming it out loud until now. "When this is finished," he said quietly, his voice dropping further still, "I need to ask you something. Not tonight. Not like this, with guards at every window and a photograph still sitting on my desk. But soon. I've been carrying it longer than you know." Nadine's chest tightened around something that wasn't fear, something warmer and far more complicated. "I'll be here." "I know," he said, the faintest, exhausted smile touching his mouth. "That's the part one still can't quite believe, even now." He left before dawn with 6 cars and a silence that filled the whole house behind him, a silence so total that even the twins, asleep down the hall, seemed to feel its weight pressing against their dreams. The 2 days he was gone were the longest of Nadine's life in Seoul, longer somehow than the 8 months of waiting for her visa, longer than any single shift at the diner during her hardest weeks of homesickness. She kept the twins busy with flour and dough and English lessons that neither of them really absorbed, because none of them could focus on much beyond the empty driveway and the phone Taehyun had left with Mrs. Yoon, set to ring the second anything changed, sitting on the counter like a held breath of its own. On the second night, Min-jae crawled into her lap during a story and asked, very quietly, in a voice so small it barely reached her, "Is Appa going to come back, or is he going to be like Mom?" The kitchen went still in a way that felt almost physical. Minjun, sitting close enough to hear, didn't look up from his book, but his hands had stopped turning pages, frozen mid-motion. Nadine pulled Min-jae closer and chose her words the way she chose ingredients, carefully, for exactly what the moment needed and nothing more. Nothing that would spoil with too much handling. "Your dad is very, very good at coming back," she said. "He has done it every single time since I've known him, even when it looked impossible. I don't think that's going to change tonight." "You don't know that," Minjun said softly, still not looking up, his voice carrying the particular ache of a boy who had already lost one parent and refused to be fooled twice. "No," Nadine admitted. "I don't know it for certain. Nobody can know something like that for certain. But I believe it, and I'm going to keep believing it out loud until he walks through that door, because that's what we do for each other in this house now. We believe out loud, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Minjun finally looked at her, his careful, serious face cracking open just slightly, the way it had the day she'd laughed too loud in a quiet hallway months ago. He moved closer and let his shoulder rest against hers, and the 3 of them sat like that, pressed together in the lamplight, the rain ticking softly against the windows, until headlights finally swept across the driveway just past midnight. Nadine was on her feet before the car had fully stopped, her heart climbing into her throat. Taehyun walked through the door tired in a way she had never seen on him, a shallow cut along his jaw catching the hallway light, his suit jacket gone entirely, but upright, breathing, whole, and for one suspended second nobody in the entryway moved at all. Both boys hit him at the same moment, one on each side, small arms wrapping around him with a force that nearly staggered him, and for once he didn't crouch carefully to their level. He simply went down to his knees right there in the entryway and held both of them like he intended never to stand back up, his face pressed against the tops of their heads. Nadine hung back, giving them the moment, her own eyes stinging, until his gaze found hers over the twins' heads. "It's done," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. The man who took the photograph, the one who ordered it, both accounted for. The network behind them is fractured badly. It will take them years to recover enough to try anything like this again, if they ever do. "And you?" she asked, stepping closer now, unable to keep the distance any longer. "I'm tired," he admitted, which from him was its own kind of confession, a door he rarely opened this wide. "I'm tired, and I'm home, and you kept them believing out loud the whole time. Mrs. Yoon told me everything in detail the moment I walked in." Nadine felt heat rise in her face. "I didn't know if it would work. I was making half of it up as I went." "It worked," Minjun said, muffled against his father's shoulder, his voice thick. "She said you always come back. She said it every night." Taehyun's eyes didn't leave Nadine's, something fierce and grateful moving across his face. She was right. She's always been right about the things that matter most. Later, after the boys had finally been coaxed to bed, exhausted from relief as much as fear, their small bodies finally able to rest, Taehyun found her in the kitchen exactly where he always found her, hands busy because stillness had never suited her. Even now, he didn't say anything at first. He simply reached into his jacket, took out a small black box, and set it on the counter between them, the same counter, the same spot, where an envelope had once landed with a weight that changed her entire life. This time, she didn't hesitate before reaching for it. She opened the box slowly, her fingers slightly unsteady, the small hinge giving with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet kitchen. Inside sat a ring, simple, understated, nothing like the cold, expensive things she'd noticed on his sons that first day in her diner. It looked like something chosen by a man who had learned, finally, the difference between what announces wealth and what actually means something. "I told you I needed to ask you something," he said, his voice usually so controlled now carrying the faintest unsteadiness, the kind she'd only ever heard from him twice before. "I've been carrying this for 6 days, waiting for the right moment, and then the world decided to remind me that there is no such thing as a perfectly safe moment. So I'm asking now, imperfectly exhausted, with a cut on my jaw, because I don't want to wait for guaranteed safety anymore. I don't think it exists. I think you taught me that staying anyway is the whole point of any of this." Nadine's hands were not steady either, the ring box trembling slightly between them. "Taehyun, I am not a simple man," he said, pressing on before she could finish, as though the words had been waiting too long behind his teeth. "I will never be a simple man. There will be more black cars someday. There may be more photographs left in produced deliveries, more nights like the last 2. I cannot promise you an ordinary life, no matter how badly I might wish I could." "I never wanted one," she said, meeting his eyes fully now. "I wanted a true one. Those aren't the same thing, and I figured that out a long time before you did." "Then marry me," he said, the words finally breaking free, simple, and complete. "Not because my sons need a mother, though God knows they love you like one already, have loved you like one for months. Marry me because this house only became a home the day you walked into it carrying nothing but a bag and your mother's spoon, and I don't know how to go back to it being anything less than what it's become." Outside, the Han River moved on, slow and gray and indifferent to the small, enormous thing happening in the kitchen. Nadine looked at the ring, then at him, then thought of her own mother's voice telling her that the best things needed low heat and patience, that you could not hurry what you truly wanted to last. She had given this one all the time it needed, and not one moment more. "Yes," she said. News of the engagement moved through the estate the way warmth moves through a house in winter, slowly at first, then everywhere at once, filling every room before anyone quite noticed it had spread. Mrs. Yoon, of all people, was the first to cry, dabbing at her eyes with the corner of her apron and insisting, unconvincingly, that it was simply dust from the hallway shelves. The twins took the news with their own brand of solemn ceremony, each processing it in his own particular way. Minjun asked, with great seriousness, whether this meant Nadine's last name would change, and whether his would too. Someday, in some configuration he was clearly already mapping out in his careful architect's mind, complete with diagrams he would probably draw before bedtime. Minjae asked only one question, the only question that had ever really mattered to him, the one underneath every other fear he'd carried since the day 3 black cars first pulled up outside a diner. "Does this mean you're not leaving? Ever?" "Never," Nadine told him, kneeling down to his level so he could see her face clearly, and meant it with everything she had left in her after everything they'd survived together. He threw his arms around her so hard he nearly knocked them both to the floor, and for the first time since she'd known him, Minjae cried, not from fear, not from a nightmare, not from the particular ache of waiting up for a father who might not return, but from something so full it had nowhere else to go except out, in tears that soaked into her shoulder. Harabiaji came to dinner that Sunday, as he always did now, shuffling in with a container of stew and stopping cold in the doorway when he saw the ring catch the light on her hand. He looked at Nadine for a long moment, the way he looked at most things without rushing the consideration, his weathered face unreadable until it wasn't. "I knew," he said finally, settling into his chair with the slow ceremony of a man whose joints had earned their complaints. "The day those boys ate your soup like they'd been doing it their whole lives, like they'd been waiting for it without knowing what they were waiting for. I knew then." "You didn't say anything," Nadine said, smiling despite herself. "Some things," he said, picking up his spoon, "you let cook on low heat. You don't rush them. You just wait, patiently, for the flavor to build into something worth tasting." The wedding was small, by Kang family standards, which still meant more security than most weddings see in a lifetime, discreet earpieces tucked behind formal collars, watchful eyes scanning the tree line even during the vows. But it was held in the garden by the river, where the light came in soft and gold through the trees Suyin herself had once planted, and nobody in attendance would have called it anything but warm. Minjun walked the rings down the aisle with the gravity of a boy completing the single most important task of his life, his tongue caught between his teeth in fierce concentration, each step measured and deliberate. Minjae walked beside him, unable to stop grinning, occasionally waving at guests like he personally knew every single one of them, which he very much did not, his joy too large to be contained by occasion or ceremony. Beatrice flew in from Yaoundé, sat in the front row, and cried through the entire ceremony, loudly, unapologetically, the way Nadine's own mother would have if she'd lived to see it, dabbing her face with a tissue that was clearly losing the battle. Harabiaji sat beside her, offering her his handkerchief twice and pretending, both times, that his own eyes were perfectly dry, a pretense nobody in the front row believed for a second. When it came time for vows, Taeyun spoke first, his voice steady in a way it rarely was, except when it mattered most. He spoke of a door that had opened in a small diner on a rainy afternoon, of relief he hadn't let himself name until much later, of a woman who had taught his sons to believe out loud and had, somewhere along the way, without either of them quite noticing the moment it happened, taught him the very same thing. Nadine spoke of low heat and patience, of a wooden spoon carried across 3 countries in a bag she had nearly checked because of the weight, of a mother in Douala who had taught her that the right things were always worth waiting for, even when the waiting was the hardest thing in the entire world. Afterward, as the last light slid gold across the river and the twins ran barefoot through the grass with a freedom that no longer needed watching over quite so carefully, Taehyun pulled her close, his hand warm against the small of her back. "No more envelopes on counters," he murmured against her hair, the words half a promise, half a prayer. "No more strangers walking through doors uninvited." "Just us," she agreed, leaning into him fully for the first time without bracing for what might come next. "Low heat. The rest of our lives to let it build into whatever it's meant to become." Behind them, Minji's laughter rang out across the garden, bright and unguarded, and Minjun's quieter laugh followed half a beat after, the way it always had, the way it always would, 2 halves of the same steady heartbeat finally, fully at rest. Some storms pass through and leave nothing behind. This one had passed through and left a family standing in the wreckage of where fear used to live, choosing fully, finally, on purpose to stay. And that's the end of this one. If part 2 hit even harder than part 1, let us know in the comments which chapter wrecked you the most. Tell us where you're watching from. If you're new here, welcome, subscribe so you never miss a story. Like this video so more people find it, and we'll see you in the next one.